literally from one high to low. I went from like, oh, the American dream, if you try, you can achieve things, to like instantly I was like, nope, this is it. Like you think, you're going to go to Harvard Police. Do you know what America is? Do you know what the world actually is?
Capitalism.
Like,
nepotism.
Right. Like, you think you can like make dreams come true. Please. It's just a myth. It took me to just honestly a really dark, dark place. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like, trying hard gets you here. I'm done.
What's going on, y'all? It's Vannesia Darby, Randy C. Bonds, and Javi, and we are the Entourage. And I always say that because those are my two homies, even though they're not here right now, they are here in spirit, okay? So today under the spotlight, we have an incredible person. She is a prolific writer. She's a good friend of mine, and her name is Isa Adney. She's a writer and filmmaker and storyteller for ConvertKit, and she's also interviewed over 180 people. So she has her personal blog called The Creative Teacup. She's working on her second book called The Little Book of Big Dreams. And she also is a profiler for ConvertKit, as I mentioned before. So she loves doing profiles. She loves doing interviews. And I actually talk about how I first got accustomed to her work, which was online before I ever even met her and started working with her. She's been featured in Huffington Post, Forbes, NBC, all these major platforms and publications. And she sits down with us today to talk about dreams and how dreams don't die. I really, really hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, let us know. Send us a comment on the Entourage Podcast on Facebook or Instagram, or even email us at the entouragepodcast@gmail.com. All right, I'm gonna stop talking. Let's get into the interview. So we have here my friend, my good friend, Isa.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm so happy to see you.
Likewise. So I do have kind of a backstory that I want to give that you and I didn't find out about until we were like a year in working together. I actually came across, this is why it's important to put your stuff on the internet, okay? Because I met your writing, I should say, when on the Huffington Post, I believe. And I want to say it was Huffington Post, but you did a piece about Trayvon Martin. And it was like right in the beginning of like the Black Lives Matter swell and everything starting. And you wrote this piece, and I was like, who is this person? And I think I looked you up, and then maybe 4 years later, we ended up working together, which is so crazy.
So amazing.
I love your voice. And let me tell y'all, like, I know I said it in the intro, but let me tell y'all, Isa is one of the best writers, like very prolific. And I love the fact that your title at ConvertKit is storyteller, because you literally craft stories and put you in the room of the person that you're interviewing. Right. So like, I just love your writing style. So I just want to say that on camera.
Thank you. If that's recorded, I'm going to need to just take that and like put it as my alarm every morning. Could like, really use that in my life.
Wake up, Isa. It's time for you to seize the day, because you're a prolific writer.
Everyone needs a Vannesia alarm if you're speaking something into their life. Actually, if you're ever looking to get into physical products, or I guess you could do that digitally and add to your phone. Yeah, I'm sure everyone let her know. You want that too, 'cause I'm sure you do. I do.
I love it. So Isa, I mean, you're not only a storyteller and a profiler in your spare time, but you also do it with ConvertKit, which is where I met you, which is a SaaS company specializing in email servicing. And then you also, I know we got started with webinars. So we're going to talk about your career, but also you're writing your second book. And we're going to get into that and how it's taking you, I think you said 8 years.
8 years. Oh, it started with a rejection, which we can, or, may or may not go into. But I was on Facebook randomly, and literally March 8th. So a couple days, at least before we were recording this, Facebook showed me a memory of like the post I made Facebook when I did it, when I got this big rejection that set off the whole process. And I was like, it's still kind of like hurt, but I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. 8 years. Exactly. And look where we are today.
I love it. In the faith-based world, 8 signifies new beginnings. So
love that.
Maybe it's. So before we get started though, I want to ask you a question because I know you. And I know that you consume and read and watch a lot of things. So besides Hamilton and Taylor Swift, what's your favorite type of content to consume?
You know me well. I would say like in-depth interviews with people I admire, like Lin-Manuel and Taylor Swift. But truly, I just did this yesterday, where I like made this giant playlist on YouTube of all of these interviews that I could find, and I look for ones that are at least like over 20 minutes of people that I'm just really interested in right now. So like a couple of the people I added were Sarah Bareilles and Ryan Coogler, and just like started letting my mind wander of like, who do I just really admire? I want to just hear more from them right now while I'm unpacking, actually, because I just moved. And it should be no surprise, I'm a profiler, right? I love interviews. I really do. So even though I do that as a profession, I turn them into films, I turn them into writing. I also, in my free time, just love listening to people share their stories, and especially in a more in-depth way. I love late night, like comedy, and I love comedy. Don't get me wrong, but I have such a hard time sometimes when I see someone who I think is just so fabulous and talented, and they're just doing something really goofy for like 2 minutes with someone, and I get it. But like for me, I'm just like, oh, but I want to know, like, when was your first rejection and how did you deal with it? And not everyone does. If they did, late night shows would take a different approach. But
late night therapy.
Yeah, I love that kind of thing. I could listen to it all day, every day.
So, and I think that's a great like launching pad, because I know that you have delved into, well, let me first back up too, y'all. So this is Isa's second career. And I'll say it in that sense because she pivoted. And I know when you first got started, you were really, you were a TV host, and you also were an advocate for community colleges and going to community college and writing your first book about community college. So I once heard you say in an interview, and you quoted someone that you actually interviewed as well, that closing that chapter was kind of like ending of the first leg of your tour.
Yes.
And so can you talk about that as far as a dreams perspective, because you built this 6-figure business, touring and talking and hosting, and you just said, hey, we're going to move on to something else.
Yes. It's really interesting you bring that up, because I had to share my bio with you all, right, for this podcast. And I was like, oh gosh, I haven't written like a bio for myself in a long time. And so I just kind of wrote something, pretty quickly and sent it off. And then later I was like, wow, I didn't even mention like my first book, my first blog. And I was like, oh, there's something there. Maybe I'll talk to my therapist about it. But I thought that was really interesting. It just, probably a little bit of it is me just focused on this season and this phase and kind of who I am now. But that was such a beautiful and important part of my life. And so the short version is I went to community college on it kind of unexpectedly. I loved school. I graduated 5th in my class. I was a straight A student, but ended up realizing I just couldn't really afford the path that I thought I would originally go on. My parents were going to take out loans, but it just didn't feel right to me, and I just wasn't knowledgeable enough to understand, I think, the scholarship world or the big college world. It also just scared me. And so I ended up at community college. I was really disappointed and discouraged the first day I sat in the waiting room with an advisor. I just felt like a dream had died. And what I found there was just an incredible education, incredible professors, really brilliant students, and realized that there was the stigma that community college was where you went if you weren't smart. And I realized by being there, like, oh no, for the most part, community college is where you go when you're not rich. And I was really just inspired by the opportunities I found there, and, how you could make the most of it. Because it's they're commuter schools. They don't have a ton of money. There's not the same student life going on. And if you kind of created that for yourself, you could really, really get an amazing education and transfer and move on. So anyway, I was so inspired by that. And then decided to write a book to help other students figure out that system and how to make the most of it, and I did that after I graduated and worked at a community college for a while, and then just got this idea for a book, and I just wanted to write it. And I'd always had, like, if you'd have asked me at many phases of my life, like, to just write down a dream, writing a book would just always show up. And it was just one of those things that I think, because I loved books so much. And there was definitely a writer in me. I wrote little things in high school for like a zine. I got some articles published.
Oh my goodness.
For zines.
Yes. Man, you just took me back. I was not expecting that. Yeah, I do remember.
Yes.
I remember zines.
Yep. So I wrote a book, and it's just one of those like early 20s things, I guess, where I was just like, I didn't know enough to be scared. And so I sometimes think about that now, and I'm just so amazed that I did it, because I'm a lot more scared in my 30s than I was in my early 20s.
Man,
so we could go on about that, but
right, it's a whole nother podcast episode.
I just did it. I just read books and asked people and like did it, and it turned into a business where I ended up leaving my job and speaking at community colleges around the country, consulting with some different like textbook education companies or their marketing departments, and hosted a TV show for a couple years at a community college for community college students. And it was just a fabulous time. I don't reflect on it enough. It was a fabulous time. I had a blog, and it was my first time getting to feel what it's like to be a creator. To have your own business, to own your time. It was just amazing meeting so many incredible people too around the country. So I absolutely loved it. And then I hit this point where I remember giving a speech, and like I just didn't feel it in the way that I usually did. And I just had this feeling that, like I've said all that I have to say on this subject. And I also had worked in student activities where I hired people who they were speakers for a living, and this is what they did. And they traveled all the time and made a very good living. And I just sort of started to feel that like, no, that wasn't me. I didn't like want to be a speaker as a profession. I didn't want to travel 200 days of the year. I certainly didn't want to give the same speech over and over again. and I just kind of felt like I've said my piece, like what's next? And that is how we first went to this rejection story. If you want me to go there, unless you want to unpack that first. Okay, let's go. So I just felt this sense, sometimes when you just feel like you're done with something and you want to grow, and it's so terrifying. I remember the pain of that. Like I wasn't like excited by this feeling. I was terrified. But I just
wait, I'm going to pause there. Did you sit in that? And I think the reason why I ask is because y'all, rejection happens at every stage, right? That's one thing. But two, I don't think that we normalize rejection enough because everyone goes through it. Right. So like, did you sit in that? Were you questioning, what you did? Like, what was your thought process back then?
In terms of after getting the rejection, or in terms of realizing I wanted to do something else?
After getting the rejection.
Okay. So how I got to the rejection is I decided I was going to like do something else. And I didn't know what it was. I just knew I needed to grow. I had done everything I, said on that subject. And so I just started looking around, frankly, at all the things. And one of the things that really stood out to me was a doctorate at Harvard that was fully funded. And it really focused on K through 12 education, but it was fully funded and it was Harvard. And I was like, this is it. This is the dream, this would be so cool. Community college to Harvard, it just sounded so good. And I felt like it would inspire, so many students that I had met over the years. And I just thought, yes, this is it. And, there's like this, maybe I can find a way to fit in that, like, in the K through 12 world, maybe I can like really hammer on the 12 part and like somehow, I don't know, talk about like, that transition into college, because I'm such a fan of a broad education and taking things from all different areas and bringing them into what you love and what you know. And so for me, I was like, I think just being exposed to Harvard and Harvard professors and Harvard education would help. I could bring that to the community college world, even if it wasn't like the program wasn't necessarily directly about community college students. And so I applied. It was the only thing I applied to. It wasn't like, I want to go to graduate school. You know, it was just like, I want to grow and I want to do something else. And that's exciting to me. And so I just applied to this program because it was also fully funded. And I really, you know, yeah, that was awesome. I definitely gave it my all. I reached out to alumni, asked for advice on my essays. I had so many wonderful people who helped me. And I got to the interview phase, which only 50 people get to. And so we get flown to Cambridge. They split us up into 2 groups of 25, and you do these like big group interviews with it. And it's a whole thing. And so that was very exciting. That's when I was like, oh my gosh, my husband and I started talking about what would it look like if we moved to Boston. We had never left Florida. It was so exciting going on the interview and walking on Harvard's campus. And it was really, I think, the first time I really started to dream bigger than I ever had before. I was just like, wow, like, look at what can happen. You know, I'm still in like my early to mid 20s and I'm just blown away. I remember just thinking about my grandma and her life in Puerto Rico and just like, I'm here. Like, this is the American dream is real, you know, like this very like pixie dust, you know, slightly naive sense of just elation, but like, just wow, you know. And then I got the email a couple of weeks later that I did not get in. And I took it really, really hard. And I've spent many years since it's how my book intros, trying to figure that out, you know, like, am I just a wuss? You know, was
trying to figure out your like reaction?
Why was it so deep and so cutting? Because it really, 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 led to like a breakdown, you know.
But even though you had achieved all these things in your life, you know, and overcome all these, you know, obstacles, you still felt some sort of devastation.
Oh, absolute devastation. And like me now, it's like, okay, you didn't get into Harvard. Like,
look,
wow.
30s and 20s are 2 different eras. We just don't say that.
I know. I try to give that sweet girl more grace. It's hard sometimes, but you know, I'm a different person than I was then. And I think then especially, I had lived so much of my life where I had been so validated by grades and by scholarships and by a business, like so much had worked out. And frankly, I think my sense of the world was, you know, also breaking down and just starting to realize how much injustice there was in the world and how like, oh, honey, you think you could get into Harvard? Like, come on. Like, do you know, it was like literally from one high to low. I went from like, oh, the American dream, if you try, you can achieve things, to like instantly I was like, nope. This is it. Like, you think, you know, you're going to go to Harvard, please. Do you know what America is? Do you know what the world actually is?
Capitalism.
Like, you know,
nepotism.
Right. Like, you think you can like make dreams come true. Please. It's just a myth. Wow. You know, you think you can go far. Like, that's ridiculous. You have gone as far as you can. It was kind of this feeling of like, yeah, that's it. Remember, you know, that ceiling people talk about? Boom. You just hit it, darling. And, you know, you better get comfortable with like, you know, how things are, which of course were fine. I was still, you know, incredibly privileged, and I am incredibly privileged in so many ways. But it took me to just honestly a really dark place. And I was just like, oh, okay, like trying hard gets you here. I'm done. Like, I don't want to go through this ever again. And dreaming is a recipe for disaster. It's like delusional to dream. It's just ridiculous. It's just no way to live. You know, it's like literally how I felt and how I remember crying on the bathroom floor and like trying to coach myself, like to be a cynic. I was just like, and I really tried hard. I really wanted to be a cynic. I really wanted to be bitter. I really wanted to like stop trying to do things that were beyond me. It seemed dumb and stupid and naive and delusional. And I just couldn't do it.
Do you think that dying dreams, whether we know it or not, are also synonymous with resurrected passions?
Ooh, tell me more.
Like, at the same time that your dream dies, maybe not resurrected, maybe birthing, It could be resurrected though. But at the same time that your dreams die, there's also something else that's brewing. You know, a lot of people say when God closes one door, he opens up another one, right? But or there's a window or there's something else that's there. But sometimes that dream has to die. Like it has to do that. And the fact that your rejection letter is the introduction for your book, right? Like do you think you would have a second book if you hadn't got the rejection letter?
This would not be the second book. That I can say 100%. And who knows if I would have, I don't really know if I would have written a second book. I like to think the writing would have always broken through, because I think that's the thing that was always trying to break through. I wrote about community college because that's where I was in life, and so therefore I took the education part and really ran with it. And what that rejection ended up doing for me is it helped me reconcile with like, how did I really feel about dreams? Did I really want to stop? And realizing like, no, I didn't want to stop and I couldn't. And it just wasn't how I was built. I don't know. I just remember thinking that about heroes of mine as well, people in history who like dreamed even when they were suffering so much more than I was. And I just thought, no, there's something here. There's something here to dreaming, even in an unfair and unjust world. And I didn't know what that was. And I certainly didn't have any answers, but I wasn't ready to let that go. And so I started reading and got an idea for this book. And also realized once I also got through just the irrational grief of the rejection, I was like, yeah, I could apply again. Like if I really wanted to go to Harvard, apply again. People were telling me, oh, some people apply 3 times. Like this is not dead. It doesn't have to be dead. And yet what it really showed me by trying as hard as I possibly could to go as far as I possibly could, I was like, I don't think actually like this world of education, I don't think it's really my dream. I don't think it's really where I want to invest more time. If it was, I would have applied again. Yeah.
Do you think that, oh my goodness, I love that. Do you think that you said writing was always trying to break through? Do you think that it was writing in and of itself and you just happened to apply it to the subject of community college and now you write for is writing the catalyst? I guess that's the question I'm trying to ask.
I think so. I mean, I wrote an essay when I was in 2nd grade about my dog dying. Like I think I was in 2nd grade, or maybe I was younger, but our puppy died. And like my instinct as a little kid was to write an essay about it. And I only recently thought about this because I interviewed a musician for a creator session, which is something ConvertKit also does. I was just there to kind of help out. And it was Judah Akers, who's also lead singer of Judah and the Lion. He's just so amazing. And we were talking, I think we were talking after, maybe you mentioned in the session about how the first thing he wrote was when his dog died. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And he is a writer, he is a songwriter. So I think writing has always been a natural thing that I've communicated. And so I think I always kind of pushed it away though. Cause I didn't know any writers. How do you be a writer? I mean, even in my adult life, it was always like, no one's, unless you're Nicholas Sparks or Stephen King or Elizabeth Gilbert, forget it. You know what I mean?
This voice, she got some punch behind her, boy. Like this voice in your head is not giving up. All right. She's relentless.
Yeah, she's mean. So I just never thought of writing as a career. So
were you doing it at this time? Oh, I know you, because you have your Creative Teacup blog site, but also, you profile a lot of people, which amazing people, and I know your bio said you've interviewed over 100 and had 180 interviews and interviewed over 180 people. Yeah. Right. So I'm assuming some for your blog and some for ConvertKit.
Yes. And some for the book.
And some for the book. Yes. So as you're doing all these things, is it a hobby at this time? The Creative Teacup, or
Creative Teacup did not exist at the Harvard rejection the bathroom floor phase. Okay. Heck no. I was only writing about education. I was only writing, even my first book, I considered it all informational, even, those rejections you always remember. The first 1-star rejection I got on that first book that sadly I still remember, though it doesn't hold weight as it used to. But someone was like, oh, it was, fine, help or whatever. But something, I don't remember exactly, which is great, I guess. But it was something about like, but the writing isn't that great, but that makes sense considering she's not a professional writer, you know?
Oh,
yeah, that hit me hard. When I first
oh my gosh. This is like an Amazon review. Like this is relentless.
Yeah, totally. So I had quite a hang up, I think, about that for a long time and without fully realizing it, but considering myself like, I wrote information, but I'm not a writer, you know, I'm teaching, I'm not writing. And so I didn't consider myself a writer for a long time, even though of course I was, and I was writing all that time. But as you can see, I'm pretty pathetically affected by, you know, one or two little negative feedbacks and my whole world come crashing down. And that's probably because I was a straight A student. So if you wasn't a straight A student, I think you do get some really good life skills. Don't worry. Those straight A students, they're going to crash and burn very soon.
But I don't think either one, like, I wouldn't even glorify either one. You know what I mean? Like, I think that students that traditionally, because a lot of, especially in the entertainment industry, we don't all have degrees. You know what I mean? So I remember I was getting my master's degree, and we're going to get into your master's of fine arts as well. I was getting my master's degree, and my boss told me, like, what you doing that for? And I just said, because I like to learn, you know, I like traditional school. And so, but I remember going like the first day at the label and just seeming like going to school or having a degree was looked down upon in the music industry, which is crazy when you think about it. But I mean, especially when you're creative, a lot of people are self-taught, you know, and for me, that was always like an imposter syndrome, you know, breeding ground, because I went to school for this, but I'm actually doing this, and this is all self-taught, and I don't really know what I'm doing, you know? And so I can totally relate when I get a negative review, or when I get very critical feedback, or if a client says something that's not 100% perfect, I too am like, oh my God, I'm a failure.
Yep.
Like, never mind, you built your own business. Like, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. Do you find that that's something similar? And all the people that you've profiled, do you find that that's like that moment happens for everyone? Or like how, I guess, rejection and internalizing rejection, like, do you find there's some thread of continuity throughout the interviews that you've had?
The thread is definitely that I ask about it a lot in every interview, because that's always the top thing on my mind. It's like, how do you do this? How are you constantly doing this? Because it hurts. And definitely the thread is that it hurts. You know, no one's like, oh, I'm sorry that hurt you so bad. It really, you know, it doesn't hurt me. No, it hurts everyone. So I've definitely gotten that thread, but what it seems like most people do is they, you know, start to really, really make a distinction between, frankly, just whose opinion matters and whose doesn't, and really getting practice on making that separation and staying focused on the difference they are making and the people who they are helping, and trying not to give too much energy or attention to the other group.
So let's talk about, you know, you get the rejection letter and you're saying, okay, I have to pivot something anyway. I'm closing this chapter, right? Did you know immediately where you were going to go?
Oh, no. I didn't know anything.
We appreciate the honesty here at the Entourage Podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Were you nervous? Were you afraid?
You know, at that point I was, at least when I got the book idea, it was in that pure honeymoon phase of like, I was just excited to pursue this book. And I think I was just excited. So I guess I sort of had not a plan, but a hope, right? Because I had written a book and it turned into a business. And I was like, I can do it again, right? It wasn't that I hated speaking or writing or traveling, you know, necessarily. It was more that I just felt like I'd come to the end of that content, which is why the musician that you're referencing to had said, oh yeah, you just finished touring your first album, right? I didn't hate being a musician. I didn't hate music. I just didn't want to sing that same song anymore. So
wait, that's a bar. Hold on. So before you go in, because, okay, so you said in the scenario, I don't hate being a musician. I just didn't want to sing that song anymore. And I think sometimes I know even for me personally, when when something happens where you feel like, I don't want to do this anymore, you throw the baby out with the bathwater, essentially. You're like, I just hate everything. Close the whole business. But you're like, no, there's actually parts of this that I really still do love and or don't hate. So let me figure out what topic or what content now fits within this ecosystem I've created.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good.
And I loved inspiring people. So while I thought education might not be, at least formal education might not be where I wanted to continue my career, I loved the sense of hope that you could still take action to change your life in an imperfect world and an imperfect system, and with, such a variety of power and privilege, that it didn't mean that you had no hope and that you couldn't move forward, even though it's harder for some than it is for others. And that was the core of the book. And that still was something I believed in and something I wanted to explore in this new book and ask questions and just broaden it, outside of just the school environment. And so I think deep down, now that you asked me, I'm realizing, I totally hoped that, okay, write a book. My last book took me a year, and I had some savings from all of that work that I had done. I was married. So I had a husband making a salary, which certainly helped. So I kind of had a little bit of runway to kind of like do this. And I thought, okay, let me just do this again. And I ended up also doing some freelance writing for Success Magazine. So I had kind of a freelance gig going, and that helped supplement as I was doing this book, interviewing people and whatnot. And then here's where the snag hit. This wasn't the same kind of book as I did at first. This was not a book I could write in a year. It's been 8 years, and I am literally just now turning in a final manuscript into my publisher this June. So that plan wasn't going to work. This book was not going to be a new business. And so that took me through a whole whirlwind of just like, honestly, trying to figure out, just trying to hang on, because I knew I wanted to do this book. It meant so much to me. But I also knew, and I also realized in this book process, I really learned I was an artist, and that became a whole new lens in which of looking at my life and my career. And so I really started reading a lot of books about art. The first one that I can remember anyway, because someone I interviewed told me about it, who was an Emmy award-winning songwriter. He was like, I think you'll really like The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp. And I was like, I just really connected with him. I liked him. I was like, oh, cool, I'll check it out. And I'm so grateful to him, because I think he's the first person that at least I can remember who like saw that I was an artist.
And when you say saw that I was an artist, what are you meaning? Like, how do you identify when you say I'm an artist?
Yeah, I think he just saw that I was creative and was like pursuing a creative book and a creative career, and that I just like the musician who said, oh, you were done touring your second album, like this just way of thinking and talking about the world where you just care about creating beauty. And, you're like, that's a big primary motivator, and wanting to create an experience and wanting to create meaning, and kind of being obsessed with that, which is, there's so many ways you could define artists. So I'm not trying to do that in one definition, but that was how I was definitely interpreting it at the time. And, and I had never considered myself an artist, because also how I thought of an artist back then was like, you were really good at drawing, or you like were really like cool, like you dressed cool and you had maybe multiple earrings and you were just like effortlessly cool. You didn't like Disney and like
you had a vibe. You were a whole vibe.
Yeah, you were a vibe. You were an artiste, like, and really that's, if you think about like, especially I'd say musicians and visual artists, like most of them are absolutely that. I will never be at that level when it comes to fashion, for one. But a whole other thing.
I see Instagram, you're pretty swagged out. Like,
I see. This takes so much effort. Anytime I interview a musician, I'm just like, oh my gosh, you're so cool. How do you do this? So I never saw myself as an artist, because to me, an artist was that. And he kind of really showed me through these books and through the conversations I had, I just realized like I vibed with the artist the most. And there was something there that I absolutely was, and never allowed myself to broaden what that definition could mean. And so I started thinking about my career in that way of just figuring out, okay, well, I love writing. I love books. I want to do this book and I want to do more books, and coming to the realization too, that like, it might not ever be a business again. You know, that business mindset, that thing I did before. I mean, I didn't start that to start a business, but like there was a very clear market. It was a very clear niche. There wasn't anyone else doing it. Like, and I realized that my number one goal wasn't to create another business. It was to create this art. And I read enough books and talked to enough people to know that also that might not ever be a business. So what am I going to do to supplement that? So I started freelancing, did that for a little while. And then that started to feel kind of lonely for me. And that's when I started looking at other options. I worked at a gym. I moved to California and worked at a gym. That was my version of like the actor who's like the bartender, you know, and then they are a barista and then they audition. That was like the artist dream I tried as well. I was like, oh, I'll do that. You know, I'll write my book and then like mop floors. And I loved mopping those floors, man. I really did. I loved it. I love the people I worked with. It was so good.
But the funny thing is, I too worked at a gym.
Yes, that's awesome.
When I quit my job. The good old YMCA, all right?
Yeah. So yeah, that was great. I absolutely loved it. But the problem was I am the kind of person who just like, I just fully invested in that job. And I just like, by the end of those 40, I still worked 40 hours a week. And like, I did not write much in that season. I was exhausted. And I was like, well, dang, and I needed to work 40 hours a week. I was living in California. I was like, well, if I've got to do this, if it's not really freeing up mental space for me to write, I might as well like get a job. So that will help me like afford California. So that's when I just started looking for like my next kind of salaried job, and how I eventually found ConvertKit and my way to you.
Yay! That was the good stuff. No, and we came together. First of all, rock star webinar producer, period, point blank. Like the stuff I'm able to do even on the production side, I attribute to like your production sheet. Like even with this podcast, you know, Alexis, our production assistant, like she has a production sheet and it looks eerily similar to the one that you created for me. And I mean, that was such, and even as I was prepping for this interview, I was thinking about that time. Like that was such a fun time that I don't think, like you mentioned before, that I reflect on enough, you know. And although I wasn't an official employee of ConvertKit, I definitely felt like a team member. With all the things that we were able to do and the people we were able to meet and the productions that we were able to do from the webinar perspective. And it was like, Isa, I'm not going to put numbers out there, but Isa contributes to the bottom line. Like that, like that's what it is. And very, very, very well. I'll put it like that. And the stuff that you were able to do and the hearts that you were able to touch, and, you know, just an extension of your desire to inspire was so evident when you were in that role. And like, it was incredible. It was definitely top 2 experiences, and it ain't number 2. I'll put it like that.
Thank you. It was so much fun. And I just really felt like we had just some magic there. And it was so special. So I was so excited about today, because I was just like, oh, can't wait to just be on camera with Vannesia. That just brings me right back to such a beautiful time. And, you know, for anyone thinking about like making big transitions and stuff too, like how I ended up there was I, you know, was looking online, saw the job webinar producer. I had never hosted a webinar when I applied for this job. I'd been on a couple maybe, but I, you know, just loved everything I read about the company. I thought it seemed so cool. And I had hosted a TV show, right, for 4 years. Yeah. And I was a blogger, you know, which they were really focused heavily on at the time, professional bloggers. So I was like, I think I could do this. And I definitely had some encouragement as well, because I'm not always great at that. But you know, you just never know what you've done before, like how it can translate, you know, even if it doesn't seem obvious.
Yeah. No, I think that's so beautiful. And to me, it seems like with the thread of your story, one, you've given yourself a lot more grace, but also, whereas, the community college season, or the rejection rather, it was like that dream died. Like you were like, it was death. But now it seems like when you pivot, it's more of an evolution. And so I think even reframing death to evolution and evolving into the person that you're continuing to grow into versus stopping and dying and coming back to life and dying. Like if you just say, like you said, I was a TV host, I was never a producer, but I hosted TV. So how can I parlay that, and you came in and you crushed it. And then now you even pivoted from there into storytelling, with something that you've always done, and, creating that job, because that job didn't exist. Like, you created that.
Yes. And this is one of the best things I got from my book is I interviewed someone who he really wanted to be a makeup artist for film, and he couldn't get a job. He couldn't get anyone to hire him. And so he hired himself for his dream job, was kind of the way he put it. And he started his own, business and started doing makeup. And, he fast forward, he won an Oscar for his work. But different things in this book, different stories stick with you, I think, at different times. So I'm so excited for other people to read it and get it in their hands and see what they get out of it. But certain things really stuck with me and shifted me. And that was one of them that and I was so inspired by profiles, in Rolling Stone and in Vogue, and these in-depth profiles. I kind of fell in love with them, and I wanted to do that. I was just drawn to it. I was so hungry to do it. And I was kind of doing it already with this book, but the book was 30-minute phone interviews. They weren't I wasn't deeply digging into people's stories. And I sort of discovered those profiles kind of mid to halfway through, I think. So I was like, I really want to do this. And I remember looking into how do you do this? And I even profiled someone who wrote a Taylor Swift profile for Vogue. So I was like, well, maybe I can learn from her, And what I learned from her was ooh, if I really want to do this for in that vein, it sounds like I would need to move to New York. I would probably need to be an assistant for 4 to 5 years, and also no guarantee that you would ever get that kind of assignment, and just something about that path didn't quite feel right to me. But I knew I wanted to do the work. And so I hired myself, and I just was like, I'm going to start a blog, and I'm just going to start writing profiles of whoever will talk to me. And the first one was so much harder to write than the second, and the third, the fourth, I kept going, and I was so inspired, and I loved doing it. I'm obsessed with doing it. And when I stopped doing webinars, and I've just started to be able to talk about this because it was such a crazy time. But the short version is my father-in-law had dementia he still does. But there were 6 months where he had severe dementia, but it was not diagnosed as dementia. He had been misdiagnosed. And so we were in this period of just intense trauma. And I always had my phone on during webinars because that's how Vannesia and I communicated, in case there was some tech issues, which sometimes happen, our little special spot. But there was this season where I would be getting texts that were it was really intense news or something really intense happening. And I just got to a place where I had to shut down being on camera. I just could not do it anymore because I had just worn out myself. That's a whole other topic, but when you're ever going through trauma, stop working as much as you can, take a break.
Oh, that's serious.
Oh my gosh. I didn't stop. I did a webinar the next day after having the hardest day of my entire life. And ConvertKit would have been like, no, don't you dare do this. But I didn't tell anybody, Yeah. And I do regret that, except for it's a message I now share with anyone I can. It's don't do what I did. But it happened, and I had to step away from camera, and that was really scary. And when I thought about what do I do, because I didn't want to leave the company, loved it so much. I thought, well, what else can I do? And I was like, well, I've been writing these profiles forever. What if I did that for our customers? What if I profiled our customers in kind of a different way of looking at a case study, and pitch that idea? not really knowing how it would go, honestly, probably thinking why would they do that? Because at the time they were really focused on being a really small company. So I was like, they're not going to add some random position before another engineer, like that was how I was thinking about it.
Because both of you don't know, it's a SaaS company. So
yes.
Very, very much so tech heavy.
Exactly. But they loved the idea. And, been thinking back on it now, like, wow, I hired myself for the job that I couldn't get. And then that experience helped me actually get paid to do that thing. And it became my full-time job. And I'm only like just now starting to process that, because at the time it all happened so fast. And just frankly, my personal life was just really, really difficult. And so I wasn't thinking about my career and my dreams at that time of life. I was just in survival mode. And yet my dreams were still like active. In fact, coming true. And I'm only just now starting to like really get to process and appreciate how they helped me during that time, even if I wasn't able to fully like process it.
Yeah. I remember that season, and it was very tough. And it was very tough for me to watch, because I'm like, I want to help her. Like, I want to help her. And I remember when I remember like right before we would go live, and, you and I would be on, and you're like, it's not a good day. And I'm like, okay, cool. I got you. And then, we would typically have a guest. And so they would be on. So we would both perk up and be like, hey, how are you? That camera shut off. Isa was gone.
Yeah.
Isa needed like time to recoup. And I remember that. And I also remember, when you were like, hey, I'm going to do this storyteller thing, and just that transition, but the fact that you dreamt of that, you were able to dream that, and to dream every aspect of your life. It seems like the dream is always, I don't know if it's pushing or pulling you, however you want to relate to it, but I think there's some sort of direction that it leads you in. And it also draws you to profile people that do it as well. I'm so excited for you and for your book, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. Because I think I've known you probably 4 years at least. So 4 out of the 8.
Yeah.
So, my last question, I know we're almost at time, is what advice would you give people who are writers, or they're aspiring to be writers? And they may just be in a difficult time. Like you said, there was a whole bunch of pivots. So what advice would you give to them?
Difficult time in terms of like
trusting their dream.
I would say to, listen to yourself and to what you need right in that moment, because there were times during not only this book journey, but also dealing with a lot of just really difficult personal changes and life changes and family health crises. There were times when I was like, I have to stop this completely. I'm not ending it. I'm not saying I'm not going to do the book, but like, I can't even have this as not only just in my brain, but I can't even let a sense of regret in. Like, no, I am giving myself the permission to set this down. And focus completely on this other stuff that needs my full attention. And there were some times when my health was really suffering because I wasn't doing that with anything in my life. It was kind of like I had this weird thing where I was just like, okay, yeah, this really bad thing's happening, but like everyone deals with really bad things. So my life shouldn't change at all. I'm very hard on myself. I think we're realizing through this interview.
Part of it is I can relate. So
yeah. And I, of course, eventually realized that that was insane. And so I definitely recommend like listening to that and not feeling like you have to push through, and knowing that like your dream is stronger than that and it will wait for you. That's something that I learned. And you take care of what you got to take care of. And if it is really your dream too, I think it does pull you back, whether it's a month later, whether it's a decade later, 2 decades. I mean, I've seen that in so many stories. And I think and then if it doesn't, cool. Just how I eventually learned that Harvard didn't pull me back, because I was open to that. If I really think about it, there was a period where I was still kind of open to, is there any aspect of this I want to continue? I did a short-term Harvard course. I went to Boston for a week even, and just realized the pull wasn't there, so I think that's one aspect during difficult times, and not berating yourself for that, or writer's block, knowing that the not writing can be really powerful and can really store up some goodness for when you are ready to share again. And then I think when you're feeling that pull, because sometimes I've been in hard times where I did feel that pull. I wrote a lot of this book in 2020 after telling myself, honey, you don't need to work on the book. I was not one of those woohoo, not woohoo, but I don't know. There was this vibe of okay, we're home, go do creative stuff. And if that helped you, awesome. But I wasn't someone who was thinking that way. I was just more devastated and terrified. And it was you don't need to do anything but get through each day. And yet somehow I felt that pull and I started just letting it happen. And so I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes to write every day or be really systematic and be really formulaic. And if that works for you, awesome. Because I think we're all different. But at least for me, there have been seasons earlier in my life where I was more like that. But for me, when hard stuff hit, I had to really, really become more seasonal and really listen to what I needed. And I have found, I just was editing the first chapter of my book this morning for my MFA that I just started last year. And I have found that has enriched my writing. I feel like I can say finally now, it has enriched my writing so much more by doing it that way.
Y'all see why I'm friends with her. Thank you, Isa, one, for just sharing your story, but also just encouraging people to dream and continue dreaming and trusting their dream. Where can people find you, and what do you want us to put in the show notes?
Oh my goodness. Well, isaadney.com is the best place to go, because from there you can find my Instagram, you can find my blog profiles, you can find the films, the documentary films that I make for ConvertKit, as well as the profiles that I write for ConvertKit. Mm-hmm. So yeah, isaadney.com is the hub.
Okay. We'll put all that in the show notes. Thank you again, Isa, for hopping under the spotlight with us. And y'all, be sure to check her out below.
Thanks, Vannesia.
Bye.